Welcome back to this episode of Good Grief of Believer podcast. I'm Julie Craig, and today I'm really happy to be with some very dear friends of mine that I've known for decades now. We've been through a lot together, and our grief stories even overlap. So, Aric and Jessica Albrecht, would you just introduce yourselves and give a little bit of a life sketch?
Yeah, so I'm Aric Albrecht and married to my beautiful wife, Jessica. We've been married for 26 years now, and we've lived most of our lives together than apart at this point. But I grew up in North Dakota. I did not grow up a member of our church, but I joined when I was 21 years old. And that kind of set us on the process that we were on, where I met Jessica and we started our life together. I'm a sales rep for a flooring company, and we live down here in South Carolina. And we've lived kind of all over the place the last few years. The Lord has taken us in a lot of different places, but I'm excited to talk with you a little bit about that today.
And I'm Jessica, and I grew up in a small town in Eastern Oregon. I am Aric's wife, and we have 3 children, Maya, who is 24, and Eden, who's almost 22, and then we have Camden, who is 16. And like Aric said, we've moved around a lot, and we've landed here in South Carolina, but our moves I felt like we've lived a lot of places, and they've definitely changed who we are, and we've been able to meet and see a lot of this country and the people, and it's been a whirlwind. But yeah, I grew up and I had 4 siblings growing up, and we had, came from kind of a little bit of what we would call dysfunctional family. And so I feel like Aric and I have tried real hard to kind of create a family and I guess in our little world to try to make it a little bit better than how I grew up. And I don't know, but it's been a ride. It's been a ride.
Yeah, I've been able to witness some of that. And one thing that I have been able to see firsthand is 2 absolutely dedicated parents and great friends. You guys have been great friends, and you're good to each other, but you've been through ups and downs. Your family's been through ups and downs. And one of the themes that we've talked about a lot as we've prepared for this recording is this idea of generational grief and people who are born into grief or born with grief even in their DNA. And that will play out in some really obvious ways as you share the stories about some of the people that you've lost, and then one of your kids who's really struggled with their own path. But our intersection came when we went to church together for many years up in the Northwest, and just have come to really love and respect you and appreciate you. I wondered if we could touch a little bit on how we became connected through Kathy and Steve's shared experiences.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't even know how to start that, because you and Steve were just like this constant, like in our world.
Yeah, you guys were like the parents that we wanted to be. We had younger children, and Steve had a fantastic mustache, which I didn't think I'd be able to grow one quite that nice. But I remember just being like, wow, like they've got it together. Like, he's professional and she's this mom who does everything right. And so, yeah, you guys were such a good example to us. And then to see Steve get sick, and I remember coming to visit you guys with him, we came to give him a blessing, Ali Yost and I, and I remember sitting in your living room looking and being like, oh my gosh, like he's not this immortal man. Like he's not this, the superhero guy that I was always thinking he was. Like he was close. And we had these conversations where it's like, man, I don't know if Steve's going to survive this, and
right.
you guys couldn't figure out what was going on with him. But
But during that time,
my mom had been sick during that time, and
this was around 2006, right?
yes. And the thing is, Eric's parents, even though they lived in North Dakota, they had a house in Idaho. And so they would come out and visit us pretty regularly because our kids were little and, you know, they were the only grandkids. And so they would make the effort to come out. And also Kathy's cancer
eventually brought her out there towards the end. She had some trials that she was included in, and there was only a few places in the United States, and one of them was in Post Falls, Idaho. And so they would come out and stay with us, and you know.
So that's how you all
guys kind of
got, because even though they didn't really live there full time, they were out there enough.
Yeah, we became acquainted with your parents.
Yeah, so you got to see them, and that's how you kind of, at least your introduction to them.
Yeah, and then I think when Steve got sick, that's kind of where, you know, we talk about these orbits, right? How Neil A. Maxwell, I'm just reading about doing this talk that he did about orbits, and how, man, these orbits that we're all on take us into other orbits with people that we get to meet for a short amount of time, and then we pull away, and then we're, you know, off to other places. And you guys were very much in that orbit with us at that time. And, you know, and my mom's orbit came into that time with you guys because, you know, they had that experience when they're at Mayo Clinic together, you know, for two separate things, and just happened to be in the same spot at the same time. And I know Steve gave my mom a blessing, which was really important to her. And so, yeah, so like through that process, you know, we all realized very quickly that Steve was human, that we're all human, and that, you know, this image I had of him as this, you know, indestructible man was one where I was like, wow, like, you know, he's going through it. And to see him be able to set aside some of the things he was struggling with, you know, physically, and all the stuff he was going through, to serve my mother by being able to be there for her and give her counsel. And, you know, it just kind of talked about who he was as a person.
Well, and just feeling, just because you guys were such good friends of ours, to watch you go through that, and to just, you know, I remember just asking, like, Julie, what can we do? Like, I know that's such a stupid question. And I said, we wanted to stop by and bring you something. And you said, yes, just something just normal. We want to just feel something normal. And it turned out, I mean, and I just remember being there and then talking to the girls, because Steve looked a lot different. Like when he got so sick, and he got so sick so fast.
Yeah, his color changed. He looked awful.
Yeah. And just, you know, I mean, I think it was you know, and Kathy was sick, and, you know, we always hoped she always was able to pull out of it, but, you know, eventually she couldn't. But it was just this, it was a real life experience for our girls, because, you know, Kathy was kind of in and out. I mean, she was grandma, but we didn't see her every day or watch that, I guess, you know, change in her the way we could see it with Steve. And, but just going through, when you're both, I guess our families were going through things so hard, and it was more than just like leaning on each other. It felt just like we were experiencing it together.
It created quite a bond.
Yeah.
And there were, there were several times where one would be up, the other would be down, and we were able to minister to each other during those times. I'll never forget, it was your mom and dad that were at the Mayo Clinic when Steve was going in for a brain biopsy, and he was scared. And, you know, you never saw Steve scared about anything, but when he was scared going in for the brain biopsy, that's when I was scared. But it was your mom and dad who were there. She had just finished a course of treatment. They were getting ready to leave, but they were there and comforted me and sat with me and prayed with me, you know, when he went in for that procedure. So yeah, we came to really be close to each other through our trials.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about your mom, because one of the themes that we're going to touch on is this idea of generational trauma, and how the trauma someone's born into can really, really affect their life and how they respond to subsequent traumas. So tell me about your mom's background and what you think made a difference in her being able to be a functional parent for you?
So my mom was born into a family where both parents were alcoholics. Obviously, not a great situation. She had siblings die as babies, multiple siblings die as babies. She had a brother who passed away in a car accident when she was very young as well, and she survived that car accident. But she came from a very tough situation. But she had a grandma who was like her,
Guardian
her
angel.
guardian angel, yeah. And she would, she'd pay, she'd give my mom. My mom would be like 7 years old, and her grandma would give her money to go pay the bills because my grandparents wouldn't be functioning enough to do that.
Or use that money
or use money for other things. And so like my mom is like a 7-year-old, 8-year-old would go run down and pay the bill for the electric bill, pay this or that with the money that her grandma gave her. And she kind of took the lead in trying to kind of take care of siblings. And, but she came from really, really tough situation, but she was a fighter. And we saw that when she, had cancer. I mean, I would have just given up, man, for as sick as she got and for all the things she put herself through just to live another day. She had an appreciation for life. She had an appreciation um, for her savior. I mean, that was something along the way. I didn't grow up like I said in the church. She grew up Catholic. My dad grew up Lutheran, and so they came from kind of different backgrounds and different understandings of that. But she relied heavily on her faith throughout her entire life, especially when she was sick, but throughout her entire life. And she had this sense of overcoming things. She was like the first person in her family, in her immediate family, to graduate from college. She became a teacher. She was a first and second grade teacher for 30 years. And she fought for the kids, the underdogs in her class, like the kids who came in who were dirty, who didn't get bathed that day, who had holes in their clothes. Like I remember those are the kids that she looked out for and fought for. I mean, she fought for all of her kids, but those kids, man, because that was her. That was her growing up. She was that kid. And man, she did everything she could to, raise her. I've got one brother to raise her boys right, but at the same time, like I didn't have a relationship with her parents. I remember being there and seeing them when we were younger, and I think they just made that decision like we're not going to have our boys in this environment, and it is what it is, and that was a hard thing for her. Her dad died of cancer, and I remember she kind of reconnected with him, and he was still just kind of this grumpy old guy who didn't want to deal with people. And her mom was an alcoholic for, pretty much her entire life. And that's how she coped with being abused by her husband. And so there's so much of that. And my mom wanted to be above that. Like she wanted her family to not have that. And so she was very sensitive to those things. But ultimately she was a fighter, and she was one that just never gave up. I don't remember my mom being sick. I don't remember my mom taking a day off, she just continued to, raise us, and then just always, was there to do a job as a mom. Like she's never stopped.
I love Kathy because Kathy is very an introvert. She's quiet, and until you sit next to her watching a football game. Oh, and yeah. She's watching the Vikings or NDSU play. That woman had a mouth like a sailor.
My
that's funny.
Yeah, my mom was like 5'3", 100 pounds, and yeah,
she was a hoot. That's the thing is, but not many people got to see that side of her.
She was the very timid, quiet first grade teacher, but like my dad does not like sports. Never has, never will. I got my fandom and my love of sports from my mom, and she was a maniac. And yeah, she would we'd watch the Vikings lose together. That was like our tradition every Sunday. And man, she would just, I'd hear her upstairs. We couldn't even watch the games together. Like she'd watch upstairs and I'd watch downstairs because both get so fired up. Like we just it was like feeding each other's fire. So I could hear upstairs, blankety blank, and she's this most proper, woman. But
that is so funny.
Yeah, those teams brought that out in her, but it was fun. The other thing about Kathy is like one of my sweetest memories with her was actually when I gave birth to Maya. I had a very strict birth plan. Like Maya was our first, and I was like, nobody will be in that room but Aric. And I knew exactly where he was going to stand. Like I just,
there was only certain angles I was allowed to view.
How this was, I was in control of this situation. And then everything went wrong. And we had been in labor, and Ron and Kathy, Eric's parents were there. My mom and my grandma were there, and Maya got stuck. It was a whole thing. It was this like, you've got one more chance to push her out, or we're rushing to the C-section. And she was turned the wrong way. I mean, it was a whole thing.
Cord wrapped around her neck, yeah.
And so everybody was in the room when the doctor said this. And so nobody left. And I was there pushing.
And I wasn't in the right spot, and I saw things that day, Julie, that I can never unsee. You know?
Yeah. Anyhow, I had Ron, my father-in-law. Thankfully, he was behind me.
Yeah.
But my mom and Eric had front row seats, and then my grandma was on the other side of me. But Kathy, this was just, I just felt like she knew what was happening, and she was trying to respect me. But she just stepped back to the side, and she just was praying. And she wasn't even like every now and then she'd come and see if anything happened, but then she'd go right. It just was so her, like, to be like, I'm here, but I'm going to be back here, and, till you need me. And then, when Maya came out, like, she was the first, like, she was right there. And Maya's named after her, Maya Catherine. And she was like nothing. There was nothing in this world that could have stopped her from being there with that baby. Yeah. And the love that just poured out, like, it was, I almost felt like I watched her heal as she was there. And she never had a daughter. She even told me later, she's like, I never thought I'd be able to be a part of something like that, because of course I didn't want her to be when I had my birth plan.
Not the plan.
But in the end, it was like this, just the intensity of Maya's birth and how scary it all was. And even though in that moment, I didn't think I wanted all those people to be there, the love that was in that room when that baby was born was just so powerful. And I just felt like for her, it was just this moment of like this joy and this gift. I felt like I just gave her this gift, and she treated Maya and Eden and Kim always as if they were her most precious gifts.
She was the best grandma. I mean, just beyond measure. She was just always. And that's one thing my mom had a very servant heart. Like, she was the epitome of, like, when I think of Jesus Christ as a servant, like, as he serves people, like, my mom was a perfect example of that through Jesus Christ. Like, a perfect example that is, she's out at our house when she was doing her chemo and her different trials, and she's got a chemo bag hooked up to her. She's, downstairs, she's throwing up. She's sick already from the treatment. And then she's upstairs and she's like, what can I get for you, Eric? Do you want me to make you a sandwich? Can I get you a drink? And, like, I'm like, Mom, sit down, please. Like, you look like you can hardly stand. And she was always looking for an opportunity to make the lives of the people around her easier and better.
And when she came to visit, there was never a time where Kathy was just like, I'm going to go take a nap, or I'm going to lay down. It was like every single waking moment, that is not an exaggeration, she was with those kids, like her grandkids. And
it's like, before she even got sick, it was like, I mean, obviously, when she was sick, I think she knew, like, hey, I'm going to cherish every moment. But before that, it was like, where are the kids at? Oh, Mom's outside playing cards with them. Mom's outside running through.
Took him for a walk.
Mom's on taking
the wagon.
And that's my dad. He was, he's not that grandpa. But I will say, after my mom died, man, he picked up his game and he became that grandpa. And that's what we asked him to do. And
right.
But one more thing I wanted to share about Kathy that just kind of just is such an, I guess, paints the picture of the woman that she is still, was she had a very traumatic child, or just life, and especially with her mom. It was a very tricky relationship. And at the end of her life, Kathy was sick, and she knew Like she just knew she didn't have much time. She'd been fighting for a while, but then her mom got sick, and she made sure, she told me, she's like, cause she's like made so much effort to find a place for her mom to live, to have resources and support, because her mom couldn't breathe on her own. And at one point, I think it was Ron said something to her like, "Why are you doing this? After everything she's done, she could care, and Kathy's like, "I can't rest, and I will not be able to rest if my mom is not taken care of." And she went above and beyond to make sure that her mom would be taken care of. And she was.
Yeah.
And she was. And she did pass after Kathy, but she was taken care of because Kathy put things in place and in order for her.
Yep.
And would you attribute that? It's hard to know since we can't ask her directly, but would you attribute that partly to her faith?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. And I think, once again, just another example of being Christ-like, just forgiveness. One, forgiving the fact that she was not the mom that my mom deserved or needed probably most of her life. Forgiving her, and then just putting herself, her needs behind her mom's. I mean, she's once again towards the end of her life, and I remember that conversation. She went set it up at the this apartment that I got for her. It was kind of part of a nursing home thing, and paid a bunch of stuff, which my dad wasn't like, what are we paying for all this stuff? And she's just like, nope, we're going to do this. And that's just who she was. And, and I think that's who she tried to instill in us to be as well. My brother and I, and obviously my girls who, had that relationship with her for many years.
It's so amazing. I'm thinking of the contrast between Maya, who was born into a room of people who loved her, welcomed her, wanted her, and the contrast for someone born into a situation that is so fraught with danger, right, and complication. And we talked a little bit about your grandfather, Jessica. Maybe you could share about him.
Yeah, he passed away a few months ago.
A few weeks ago, or
it's been a few
months.
Okay. March. Yeah, and he'd been sick. Like honestly, he's had issues his entire life. Like he hurt his back when he was younger. He's had he's lived in chronic pain. Basically,
multiple car accidents, serious car accidents that probably should have killed him. Like when I met him when we were married, he was already in tough shape physically, and that was 26 years ago. So he was through it for sure.
But so I don't have a relationship with my birth father. I've only seen him a handful of times in my whole life. But my grandfather was always in my life. I always knew who he was. And he made an effort because of his life. He was born to a mom who was bipolar and a dad who was an alcoholic. And he was not born into love. He was not born. It was like, great, now we have to deal with this kind of situation. And because of the just dysfunction of both of those people as his parents, no one in their families really, they tried, they could stay with them people for a while, but then it was just too much and they'd have to find someplace else to the point where there was a family member who let her, and my grandfather at the time was 2, live in a chicken coop on their property. They didn't want her in the home.
This is your great grandmother, his mother?
Yes.
Yes.
And then when he was 4, she dropped him off at an orphanage in Salt Lake. And he was there. She left him there for 4 or 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
And then just showed up and picked him up one day. And he ended up becoming emancipated from her when he was 14 years old. And then, he tried to live on his own. And then he met my grandma, my birth grandma, came from a really rough family. They were both alcoholics, and she had her own trauma, and they found each other in their trauma and in their grief, and especially in a place like Salt Lake City, Utah, where the culture is supposed to be, what they come from is completely opposite of the culture that is around them.
Right.
And they didn't fit in anywhere. So they were 2 misfits that found each other. And
married at what, 16? I mean, they were young.
They went to Idaho to get married because the age was like 16 lower.
Or 17, but yeah.
And she had my father. She had gotten pregnant, so my birth father, was born to them at a very young age. And then anyway, it was just, and their marriage did not last. And it was just, my birth father grew up with an abusive stepdad, and he abused. And so my father ended up abusing drugs, and it was just awful. And but my grandfather was watching it all, and he couldn't intervene. Right. And so he ended up getting remarried, and having a family with my grandma, who I love, and she's my step grandma. But even with that, those 7 children that they had a lot of sad, hard things happen that were out of their control with those children. And it was just and then on top of that, my grandpa has these physical conditions, and I think I appreciate that even more now in my life, to see the efforts he made to know me and my sister and my brother when he had this family, and they lived 6 hours away. It wasn't like they just lived down the road. And we were always welcome. If my mom would drive all the way up to Seattle so we could see them, and he would drive whenever he was passing through, wherever he could. But we had the blessing of actually Eric's first real job after we were married. We lived in the same town as my grandpa and my grandma.
Right, which was pretty crazy, because when I got that job, it was supposed to be like in Colorado, mm-hmm. and then things fell through, and all of a sudden it was like, hey, would you guys want to maybe live up in Washington State? And we're like, well, what area? And it's like, you can kind of cover north of Seattle, up in the islands, peninsula, and all there for your job. And I was like, great. And she's like, well, my grandpa lives up there. And that's how we got to Miami. And kind of to go back on the theme of these orbits, right? Like this orbit all of a sudden took us there, and we got to be in his orbit for 2 years. And I will say about this man's character, like he was really the first, he was more like a father figure to me than a grandpa. My real first example of what it meant to be a priesthood holder, and to teach me about that, because I had just joined the church a couple of years earlier and got married, and he was kind of the first one to talk to me about what it meant to be an honorable priesthood holder, and to exercise that priesthood, and taught me how to, what blessings. And that was like, he was my example more as a father than a grandfather. We built a house. He was a contractor. And so he helped us build our first house. And when he says help us, he told me how to do it, because I was out digging holes. It was something I had never done. And now I remodel and do different things because of the things I learned from him on that, because he was a contractor. And so the life lessons he taught me, I will always hold those things so dear to me, because I think because he had some issues with his own children who didn't really understand or maybe respect those things or appreciate those things. Here was a guy who was like a sponge. I'm like, well, teach me all these things, and teach me about the church, and teach me about this, and teach me about how to support
and
my family.
And he was like, he had gone through so much for him to be there, to be that kind of a person. Like, he worked so hard on himself and went through so much, and to just be able to pour into Aric and have Aric appreciate and just soak it all up meant so much to him. And we didn't know until later that the time that we lived there close to them, and they were there when Maya was born too.
Yeah, they were there.
I knew, though, he was way far away. He was in the farthest corner there could be.
He was like, I got nothing to do with this. Yeah. So.
But at the same time, like, again, nobody really expected it to happen at that time, but it was just all of a sudden they came and checked on me and checked on her, and it's like, it's happening now. And there really wasn't a moment to be like, okay, who needs to leave the room?
No, it was death stuff. So yeah.
But again, I think about the time, and we didn't know, he told us later about some of the things the grief that he was battling and things that he was going through those 2 years that we lived with him. And that he was able, and my grandma told me this, that they never thought they'd ever be able to be a part of something so sacred, as Maya's birth and birth in general, but let alone his granddaughter. It was his great granddaughter. And, but to know what he was born into, yes. and to be able to have this moment and to see like his posterity, and to feel like there's a lot of healing that happened even for him in that moment. But more than that, our connection, like, because we got to see each other so frequently, it was an everyday connection for those 2 years. Like, we got a window into him, and I got a like really like just an appreciation for who this man became from what he was born into. Yeah. And that because of the work he put into himself, I got to have a better life. I got to, or not even a better, but he gave me a peace so that I didn't grow up with this hole that could have made things a lot harder on me.
Yeah.
Right. He really made that effort, and that I can't, there's no way to express what he did that made me whole enough, to not carry some of the things. Like, our generation is the generation like that finally stopped the abuse of relationships, the abandonment of families. He came from a generation and generation and generation of that. His father did the same thing, his grandfather, I mean, literally for generations. And that was something that he was so proud of. And he would tell us frequently how proud he was of us that we broke that cycle. But, I just hope he realizes how much his influence is what helped us be able to do that.
That is amazing. He sounds amazing. And he sounds like such a man of Christ. And again, the question, would you associate his faith with his change?
100%. And he vocalized that over and over again. Yeah. Like, it's almost like you couldn't have a conversation with him without somehow coming back to Christ or his, how he got through it. And he's like, I'm Job. Like, I know, he's like, I know, but I know the Lord. I know him. And
yeah, we spent, hours as we were building this house and doing things together. Just talking. It was always like a life lesson. Like, it was always a lesson that he was tying into, like, we're building this foundation, and like, okay, well, this is the foundation, and like, and we're doing this and we're doing that, and I'm like, wow, this guy, like, he is like all this. Wow, he's just pouring it into me. But I think I said, because I was a sponge and I wanted to learn those things, and I appreciated those things. But I look back at it now, and it was like everything was kind of a life lesson. It was like, he tied so much together, but back to the gospel. It was always there.
And when my sister and I had our kids really close together, and we have 7, is that right? Girls, 6 girls.
6 girls total, yeah.
6 girls total. And I was having a conversation with my grandpa one time about how because we were in Spokane, and the girls, my mom and stepdad would always have a week every summer where they would have the kids come and just stay with them. And so I was telling my grandpa about it, and he's like, I want to come down. And so when the girls were like, I think Maya was probably 8.
Yeah.
And Eden was 5. He came down and he brought this scrapbook that he had from his, like, he had made, or actually my grandma had made for him, but it had pictures from when he was little, like somehow, some way they had some of his drawings, and then just his life. It was like his life story. And we have pictures. It's such a precious memory for me. And my girls totally remember, like, they are all literally at his knee.
Yep.
All these little girls.
Looking at this.
And they're all dark hair, dark eyes. And my grandpa, well, by that time was bald, but he was a blonde and blue-eyed man, tall man. Like, these
really?
girls, like, you would have never known were his great-grandchildren.
All these little Lamanite children, right?
Yes.
The funny thing too is, like, going back to that, he just was just such a soft-spoken, just such a gentle soul. And the relationship he had with his grandkids. And the other cool thing too that came to my mind was right before our daughter Maya went on her mission, we went out to see him. And because she wanted to see him, because honestly, every time we'd go out there, I was like, oh, this is probably gonna be the last time we're going to go see Grandpa. Like, we had that
a decade,
like 10 years. Like, every time, like, we'd go out there every year or so, every 18 months, and go see them. they lived on the coast and be like, well, we're out that way. We should go see him. And well, this might be the last time. But Maya really thought, you know what? I mean, something happened on the mission. You never know. And he shared with her his grandpa, his missionary. Was it? Yeah, it was.
Oh, it's like our sixth. Yeah, it was, because that's the thing is my grandpa came from a link that got broken.
Yeah.
There was a family of.
So what do you mean by that for people that might like somebody who had been in the church and was actively engaged and then had a child who broke away?
Not just, but and I would even say it wasn't even just the church or the gospel that they walked away from. They just didn't embrace it at all.
Yeah.
It's like never had it and then walked away. It was just, they just didn't, it was the whole family converted, but this person was just kind of like,
not for me.
Not for me. And so that's what's crazy is that we do have this legacy of this ancestors who embraced the gospel of Christ and joined the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints in its very infancy. And then, but we come from this link that never really embraced any of it until us. Okay. And so when I think of my grandfather, he did have these ancestors that like totally embraced, like I said, we're in the infancy of this gospel and went on missions to England and at the very beginning of it and brought, it was, and it was like, he was so proud that he had these far enough back, seventh grade.
But his direct line was the one that was off the path, right? And so like he had this mission journal from his grandpa,
fourth great grandfather.
Yeah, right. But it was just like, and it was able to share that with Maya as she was going on her mission, and it was such an important link that he made with her because, up to that point, she was the first grandchild who served a mission of his great grandchild.
Yes. So. And the difference that living the gospel daily has made in the lives of those who've chosen it.
Yeah. Well, and to him, I will always remember, there wasn't a time that we said goodbye that he didn't have tears in his eyes. And it was just like, you need to always say, God bless you. And he was just like, and could not ever leave without him telling how proud he was of us for living the gospel and raising our children. And because to him, it was like, this was his most precious gift he could give. And we actually embraced it and took it and we passed it on. And that's all that, I feel like we could have given back really to put some peace and balm to his soul after everything he'd been through. It was like, this is your posterity that is, like I said, we were able to finally just break that cycle. And, I think it just made him so, so proud.
I feel like it's such a testament to what I have observed and really know is true, is that Jesus taught certain principles. And when we live those principles, it just makes all the difference in our lives. And you see what power there is for a person like your mom or your grandpa who are born into dysfunction, grief, addiction, abandonment, pain, all of this. When people are born into those situations that they had nothing to do with and have no control over, the great strength that the principles that Jesus taught can become in a person's life, it's so impactful that it can change the whole course. That's kind of what we're getting at, right? Is that
absolutely. And because when you think of people who are grieving, when you think of what do they go to? People can go to alcohol, they can go to drugs, they can go to just destructive behaviors. But then if you turn to Christ, that is where it's like you can actually heal. Those other things will never allow you to heal. It just makes you not think about it or not feel it. Right. Going to Jesus, we feel it, but we can also heal, and then we can be better and move on and not take this path of destruction that we're on and affect all these other lives and these other people.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
Almost like it's ingrained in that DNA, right? That DNA that's passed to, and he was trying to stop that. My mom was trying to stop that. It was like, when rise above the situation so that my kids, my grandkids, my great grandkids aren't going to have that, even though that DNA might still be there, they're going to have the tools to overcome those things. And that is the
Jesus.
gospel. That's Jesus Christ. That's the gospel, is that tool that helps overcome all those things that are passed to us, whether we like it or not. So
Absolutely. Well, so now let's turn to uh, this background that you both have. I find it very significant for the parenting experience that you've had. So maybe touch on that.
So we have a son who is adopted, and we adopted him at birth. Except we've learned over the last 16 years is that that's not an actual factual statement. When people say we adopted our child at birth, that's not true. You adopt that child at 9 months. They are already 9 months in the womb, experiencing all the things that birth mom has experienced, all the negative, all of it. And so when Cam was born, we did all the things that you do to prepare yourself. We did to become adoptive parents. And
the process is ridiculous to become an adoptive parent. So anybody who's listening that is an adoptive parent, we feel you, we understand you. Like, it is so hard to adopt children in this country, which is a whole nother topic for a whole nother time. But the fact of the matter is just the fact that you have committed to doing that and you've done it. Thank you, because there's so many children who need a home. But at the same time, you don't get a manual. Like, you don't be like, we had 2 biological children. And so you kind of just are like, this is how we're going to do it. This has been working.
We know how to do this. We have kids.
And unfortunately, that's just not the case.
And with our son, he was and he's African American, so he's Black, and when we had no idea when we decided to adopt, we didn't put a preference or anything like that. In fact, we didn't even know for the first 6 to 8 hours
during the process when
that we're like, oh, by the way, what's his nationality? Like, what's his ethnicity? We don't even know. And then, but he was born in Charleston, South Carolina, which is very crazy because we live an hour away from Charleston now. And we were living in Spokane, Washington at the time. We didn't even know where Charleston was. So we had to look on a map and figure out, we had 48 hours to get to him. And, but during this whole adoption process, we felt like people asked all the time, why don't you just do foster? I mean, it's so much easier. It's so much cheaper than private adoption. And I was like, no, because I want a newborn who's not had any issues, been exposed to anything. And I had no idea.
No, I mean, this idea of like, well, if they've been placed or they've had some trauma, they've been in a bad situation. You don't want to get a child that, this sounds insensitive, but like a broken child. Like, you don't want a broken child. Like, you want this fresh baby that comes into the world, and you can then
mold them and
take them from that point. But like Jessica said, we didn't get Camden at day 2.5. We got Camden at 9 months, 2 days and a half, because all that stuff that was going on while he was being formed in the womb, like all those emotions, that stress, the cortisol, all that stuff,
this generational trauma that sadly was in his background.
Yes. Right. And so as he was growing, he was a wild thing. But I also was like, he's a boy. I had 2 girls, and
everyone's like, that's a boy. The boys climb up on top of the fridge when they're 2.
And
that's
I have
totally
brothers
normal,
who have ADHD. So I'm like, okay, we're probably dealing with that, but like, it just all seemed very, and then we moved a lot. We moved when he was 3 years old from Spokane. And then we've moved a lot since then. And so we attributed a lot of his behaviors to just, we're moving again. He's ADHD and, he's impulsive. But it wasn't until he was 10. And he, by that time, had been diagnosed with ADHD and was on some medication for that, was that he really started seeing behaviors where, like, he would run away, but he wouldn't really run away. We couldn't find him anywhere. We'd be frantically looking around the neighborhood, and he was outside somewhere, perched, watching us
to see what we would do.
To see what we would do. And then he would take things and, like and
steal things.
Like
and, yeah.
he really wanted a smartphone, which was ridiculous because to us when he was in 5th grade and things like this. And he would, so he'd go and take one from a classmate and do these things. And we were just like, what is happening? And then we reached out to, we got him some help, and we learned that he has attachment, RAD, which is reactive attachment disorder, and he has abandonment trauma. And the attachment disorder I understood. The abandonment trauma was really tricky at first until we learned more about it. And we did the therapy with, it's called Secure Child, where we learned about that Cam, like just the importance, and we all know about, like we were talking about Maya's birth situation, even as traumatic as it was because she was stuck and she was turning purple and all that. Once she was out, it was just love, hands-on, constant. I mean, back then they weren't into the skin to skin like they are now, but this baby was surrounded.
Yeah, I mean, I was there, next to her 30 seconds after she was born, and they got her crying, and I was there.
And he was talking to her. She stopped crying.
Her father, not just her mother, her father was there.
And so,
because I couldn't even be near her. No, I was so messed up after she came out that my body had to be dealt with. And so what truly was his voice when she stopped crying. And then once I was well enough, they were able to bring her to me. I never let her be in the nursery. They kept saying, you've got to let her go back. I'm like, no.
I slept in the room that night, and I'm like, nope, we'll get up there. Nope, we don't. But, so she was from the very moment she was in existence, she was with us, and we were with her, and Camden.
So that created the secure attachment that a newborn needs.
Because when that newborn is born, it's within that first so many minutes and hours, their brain is how am I surviving? How am I going to survive this?
It's the most traumatic experience for them.
And so instantly she had that. Eden, our daughter, instantly she had that, and in our minds it's okay, well, Camden was born, and I'm sure the nurses took good care of him.
And we got there as fast as we could, but it was still 2 days.
2 days later.
And that's the thing. And it was, I can't even explain when I found out that Cam was born. I knew he was my baby. I knew without a doubt this child was mine, and I could not get to him fast enough. Right. But it's fast enough still didn't make a difference when it came to what he needed and what that did to his brain and just his psyche in general, just his, he's in this nursery, and of course he's being tended to.
Right.
He's not being loved.
He's not being loved.
But these are very, very new breakthroughs, right? Yes. In our understanding of neurology and how our neurology affects our physiology. And so.
And he's living it. I mean, we see it in our children, the difference, because so even though the moment that boy was put in my arms, he has never, ever wanted for love and affection and attention from our family.
I mean, even I think to a point where more than our girls, honestly. I mean, I think the attention, the love, was even more extreme because of his situation and the miracle that he truly was being born to us, because we waited. Jessica went through infertility issues, and we just, we felt this pull to have another child, and it was a desire that we couldn't shake. And so when we finally were able to get him, I remember bringing him back to the ward a couple of weeks after he was born. We came back from Charleston, and it was just a party in our side.
He was a celebrity.
We walked in, everybody was just surrounding us, our ward family, and it was my gosh.
We even joked that he was a mascot of Liberty Lake. Everywhere we went to Albertsons and people knew us. Well, and Home Depot. I was oh, there's Cam.
I was the white guy with the black kids, so everybody knew me. But they, even though they didn't know me, they knew me. Every time I'm oh, look how big he's getting. I'm like, ma'am, who are you? Please don't touch my child. I mean, it was everywhere we went. And then as he got older, it's I think he really thought the world revolved around him, because he would just go everywhere, and it was just people would flock to come see him, and it was children
there was so much joy in his existence.
Yes.
And yet he had a wound.
Right.
Yes.
He would
had a wound.
That's why I couldn't understand in the beginning of this, when we're first the beginning of this journey of navigating Cam and what was happening to him, and why his behaviors were just so extreme. Like, I mean, this podcast would be hours and hours long if I even gave you a fraction of the things that he would do. But it was always, we learned, it was, will you still love me if I do this? Will you still love me if I do this? It's like our love was conditional to him.
Yeah.
And he couldn't believe it.
Transactional. It was very transactional. It was like, okay, well, if I do this, will you love me? If I do this, will you not love me? And that was like, but it was all subconscious, right? It was that grief, it was that trauma that he was born into. Like, he didn't, as a 9 or 10-year-old, couldn't express like, this is why I'm doing it. It was just like, I don't know why I'm doing these things. And even now, he still has those moments where he's like, I just don't know why I do these things. And it's like, it's almost like his brain is trying to continue to say, yep, you know what? These people don't love you. These people don't.
Well, he is so afraid of rejection that as things get better, the closer and the more comfortable he becomes, it's actually very scary to him.
Yeah.
And it's like we are learning and have learned how to be, it's the complete opposite of what you naturally want to do with a child when they are breaking your rules and violating your trust.
We had to break down our parenting skills
and start from
scratch when he was 10 years old. So, I mean, we'd been parenting for years. I mean, Maya was 17 at the time, 18. I mean, it's like, man, you parent for that long and you see the success that your other children have with how you've parented them. You've learned along the way.
We go to church every Sunday. Right. We do family prayers. We do scriptures. We're doing come follow me. Like, why is
this one not getting it?
The rails. And, and we did all the things that we actually were in a program where he had, I will say again, we could have another podcast on just the miracles that the Lord has done for Cam, the people he has put in our lives, in his life, the programs we were able to get into that we had no business having access to just for Cam.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've done all, but I look and now where we're at. So he's, we've even moved. We were living in, we lived in a place in Greenville, South Carolina, which was a wonderful place for 5 years because there was a ministry in our community, a big church that did foster and adopt. So there was a lot of families that looked like our family. So it really wasn't weird for Cam when he was in kindergarten, first, second, third grade to be like, my family looks like this.
Yeah.
My mom looks like this. My dad looks like this.
And I was very involved in the community and in different youth programs, coaching and different things.
What a wonderful ministry. That's fantastic.
And so like we really felt this obviously this connection to that community because it was. And the first time I'm out there coaching football and, most of the team looks like Cam. And, I'm out there letting them have it for something. And these Black mothers are like, oh, coach, and like they didn't realize I was dad yet. And then they're like, oh, okay. Like they just think this white guy is giving this little Black kid the business. No, because he's son. But like you get to know that and like took down walls. And I think right now, and this is something else, we'll go off a tangent, but like we just have such a divide in our country, race and these things. And like, man, we were a bridge. It was this amazing experience that we got to have in Greenville, South Carolina, because I'm the whitest guy from North Dakota you're ever going to meet. And I have this little Black child, but like, I was so accepted into the Black community, and they were like, this guy gets it. Like he, like where these moms at first were kind of a little standoffish with me. By the time we were down there 2-3 years later of me being their coach for their children, they're like, Coach Aric, you got my son after practice today. You gonna take care of him? Like, we got to go. And like this, and like trusted us completely. Like we were kind of,
and then what happened is we moved to Roanoke, Virginia, which is Southern Virginia, where there's no diversity.
Yep.
And within the first week of school, Cam was being called a Cocoa Puff. And
oh my gosh.
And these names, and some of them weren't even to be derogatory. No. It was just, but Cam, and of course he's trying to act like it doesn't bother him, but the thing he didn't want to be was different.
Yeah.
Right.
And then even like his group of friends, within this group of friends, one of them called him a burnt chicken nugget.
Oh.
And it wasn't like it was supposed to be funny. But this is like
because to him, to them, he's a novelty, not a person.
Yes.
Yep. He was the token Black kid. And listen, I grew up in North Dakota, like I said, and I think there was 3 Black kids that went to my high school, right? And very ignorant, right? You know, like we play basketball, and all of a sudden if the other team had a black kid, like, oh my gosh, we're done. Like, you know, we're screwed. Like, I mean, you know, it's like you're just an ignorant kid. And I think a lot of this was ignorance. I think it wasn't like racism.
Right.
They were just ignorant kids who didn't have other black
And, you know,
kids in their lives.
there were a few, once he got into middle school, there was a handful of
Then it
definitely
became more
racial,
and then
but
it was,
a lot of it really was. And that was so hard to explain to
Yes.
this like 11 and 12-year-old
who is still seeking acceptance in the
Trying
world,
to belong.
and really has
Right.
some identity formation stuff too with the race issues, because you know we are a mixed race family. Jessica's half Honduran. I'm Frosty the Snowman, and then you've got Camden, who's my child. Who, you know, we are a mixed bag here, and you know, in our family it works, right? We understand that, but like to him and his mind and how it works is like, how do I really fit there? Do I really fit there?
Well, and because we left, the other part that was so bad for his attachment was that we kept moving.
Yeah.
And like in Greenville, we were there long enough for him to start to feel like, okay. And again, the community we lived in was very easy to fit into. And then it was like to move to this other place, which we had an incredible church family who
Yes.
just rallied around us, which is why we survived that. But at the same time, there's no people of color anywhere. And Cam would just chase anything that helped him identify to his color. And like this is a kid who's been flagged for talented and gifted programs, but would dumb himself down to be in lower classes because, you know, if there was a kid who might look like him in a lower class, then he wanted to be in that class, or he wanted to be.
That he would fail things on purpose to not get into the gifted programs because he could then go down with the kid who kind of looked like him and he could kind of relate.
But that's the thing is like, but that was, he doesn't understand. He wouldn't have said that to you that's why he did it.
Nope.
Right.
But that's where he was just craving this belonging, and it didn't matter how much we poured into him or told him. It's like his grief that he was born into just lives inside him, and it makes him not able to feel what the rest of us feel when we are comforted, or when, you know, when we have an exchange and feel a connection with somebody, we kind of put that in our pocket. Where with Cam, it's almost scary because that person could leave or that person could reject him.
So have you seen glimpses of where this goes away? Have you seen glimpses of him healing? Is there hope for Cam? What is the hope?
Oh, 100%. There has to be hope. But we talk about it. I mean, we try not to talk about it, to be honest, because we feel like it is our constant conversation.
It's like when you're in the pool, do you really need to talk about being in the pool? Like we all know we're in the pool. We know we're swimming. We know we're treading water. It's like, should we tread water today to survive? Like, no, we just have to do it, right? So you kind of just get to the point where you're like, yeah, we don't, you know, but we have these moments. I mean, you know, we discussed earlier, we went to the temple. It's about 2.5 hours from us. And so we have a lot of time in the car to talk about things and a lot of time on the way home to talk about things. And we had some really cool experiences each individually last night. And just the idea that, you know, like, yeah, like we do see he's made a lot of progress. You know, it's slow and it's painful. And a lot of times it may be 2 steps forward, but then it's 1 step back immediately because, like Jessica said, when things started going really good with Cam, like if we had a really good day and we felt like, man, everything is clicking, we would brace ourselves because we knew in the middle of the night something bad was going to happen. Like he would be like trying to get out of his room. He was going to go break something. He was going to run away. Like it truly was this pattern of forward, backwards. And we've had so much more forward in the last few months before we kind of had this last issue where he ran away again and got into trouble, where like we've seen that and we have so much faith and hope that what we're doing and what Christ is doing for him is working. But at the same time, it's such a slow process.
Well, because you're dealing with a child.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a child going through puberty. Like there's because even if you have a child that didn't have these things, that's already a hard time.
Right.
But now you're having this, and the grief that we feel as we walk through this with him. So Cam went through a period of time where it was self-harm, but we didn't even really understand it wasn't traditional self-harm, but he was like peeling the skin off the bottom of his feet. And we didn't even know because he was always wearing socks. I mean, how often do you check the bottom of your kid's feet? But I was just noticing, I'm like, dude, because he was on swim. He was doing swim and he was wearing his socks to the pool. And I'm like, what are you doing? And then we saw the bottom of his feet, and
it's like he would clip it with a clipper, like take the skin off. Like same thing. It was just like this. It was like this way he was trying to deal with it and feel
his grief. And that's the thing, is he didn't even understand why he was doing it. Right. And when I really saw it, and I remember just one night when I saw how bad they were after his bath, or after he'd come, and that's the other thing. He's like a preteen. You're not going to be hanging out with them while they're taking a shower.
Yeah.
I went, he was sitting.
We saw him. He didn't want him to see him.
Yeah, he didn't want it. But I just remember I went into the bathroom and I saw his feet and I just like gasped. And I remember just like, Cam, you need to let me put, some antibiotic on your feet. And to see like just, the pain, because I knew why he was doing it. And just feeling like this isn't even going to help. But I'm going to do something. I've got to do something. But it also just brings you back to our Savior. Like, just these wounds that we have. And like, he's there and he wants to, and he's putting the ointment, he's trying to. But there's just pain we have to feel. And I don't know, I guess when you ask if there's hope, I feel like Aric and there has to be hope. And we feel the gift of Cam for us is seeing him through the Savior's eyes and seeing how hard the Savior fights for us, because we are willing to fight that hard for Cam. And to see these glimpses of him recognizing, like when he came home after he'd been gone for a while in a facility, he just wanted me to rub his back and scratch his back. And every night before he goes to bed, he would come in here, and he's this 6'3".
He's 6'3", 180 pounds. He's not a little boy anymore. He's way bigger than me. He's a man.
And he just wants to be. And he literally lays between Aric and I. And I just scratch his back and play with his hair. Yeah. That is a miracle. That he feels that connection, and that he wants that connection, and that he can trust it. And every time, he's had court hearings and we show up, there's been so many comments from everybody, from the solicitor, for the judge, the officers there, that how lucky he is that he has like a dad, that not, a mom and a dad that show up for him every single hearing. And those are the things that make him really, and now that we've been in this for a while and now we have dealt with the system, we see it firsthand.
And he's starting to recognize it too.
And he is starting to recognize it.
All the kids in his pod, they don't know who their dad is, or most of them do, but their dad is
nowhere near
him. They're in jail. And so he's realizing like this thing I've been running towards, right? This image, this belonging in this, like he wants to be in this, in this Black community or whatever it is. Like he's now surrounded by all these kids who look just like him, but their situation is so far worse. And so it almost makes it more confusing for him, because he's like, why do I still feel this way when obviously my parents are here for me? My parents continue to show up for me. They're the only parents out of all these kids that go to court.
Trauma. Right. Traditional trauma.
Right. The recognizable, you can put a label on it.
And so then he's like, I know I have you guys. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't. But when I saw him on Wednesday, he was like, Mom, I know I don't belong here. And to me, again, that just for his awareness to be able to say that to me, and for him to, and he's like, I don't go out when they have rec because I don't want to get into trouble, because they mess with him, especially because they know that he is not going to be there for a very long time. But then there's something that's happening to Cam in his heart, though, because the compassion that he has for these kids and for these people. Yes. And he was like, Mom, there's two boys that have kids, one's 16, one's 17. And he's like, and they just keep screwing up because they've been in here more than they haven't been in here. And he's like, and I'm thinking, he's like, I won't say it to him. He's like, but you have a kid. Like who's going to be their dad? And those are things that Cam can say because he has a dad that he's tried to push away, a dad that he's been, trying not to accept. And now it's like the reality, the things that he's being real life things. And then he's had friends, he's made really good friends with kids who've had the most horrific abuse because their mom or dad are completely checked out. They have their own issues of substance abuse and
generational trauma.
Generational trauma. And so Cam's looking at this, and this is a very confusing place for him to exist because in a lot of ways he feels, yes, he has generational trauma, but
not from us.
But it's not from
Right.
But he still has to learn how to cope and identify this grief and understand where it comes from and learn how to cope in a healthy way. And then the other miracle is Cam had told me that he also had sought out counseling where he's at. They don't offer it. You have to request it and seek it out.
Mm-hmm.
And
we've had him, a dozen therapists over the last 7 years, 6, 7 years. More than that probably.
And he has, and the thing is, every single one has been a stepping stone to where he is at.
Yeah.
And I would never say that none of them work or something didn't work. Mm-hmm. I believe that he got something from everyone. And at the stage he was in, that's what he could handle. And he took from it what he needed at that time.
Yeah. To the point now where, it was before us saying like, you need to do this. Now he's actively saying, I need this. And so that's, once again, another huge moment of growth and a thing that we see as a huge milestone, in his life. And as he's trying to turn things around for himself. And I think
we feel like I just feel like I need to, it's so hard to grieve with a child who, who is still here.
Right.
And to watch them do self-destructive things that are so antisocial and so things you can't share with the world because he is a minor and you don't want this to haunt him and you want people to judge him for these horrible mistakes that he's made, but they have no idea where we're coming from, where he's coming from. They don't know all of him. All they see is this piece. And so it becomes very isolating and very lonely to grieve as a parent of a child who has these issues. Because if you have a child, heaven forbid, they have an accident, they're paralyzed or they get cancer, it's like everything's like the support system it's just massive. And it's a hard thing, but it's easy to share because it's not shameful, right?
Right.
And then when you have a child who has these horrific experiences, all mental health, like tragedies, you feel like, how can I share? And how much can I share if I do share? And I know, like, Cam knows, he knows who he came from when it comes from this part, like this part of him. We are open about our struggles and our grief because to a certain extent, because if I've learned anything over these years from my own childhood, trying to, hide some of the things I was experiencing or the grief I was having, is that it helps nobody. And there's somebody out there, if there's another parent who is having a child who's doing these horrific behaviors and these things, it's like, you're not alone, because that's the only thing that can bring any sort of peace or any comfort is not feeling alone. And obviously we have our Savior and we lean into him, but to have someone in real life, like tangible, who can hug me and we can have a back and forth conversation and I don't have to go through the whole thing and then walk away thinking like, oh my gosh, I overshared or they're going to judge. that just adds to your grief. Because then it's like, that didn't help me. Now I just feel like I totally overshared and now they're going to judge me and my family. Right. And so it's like, so with Cam, like he knows that we talk about this, and he knows like one of the things in our church family here, we moved here when he was in a facility. So when he came back, he was only here for a few weeks before he had to leave again. And these people have absolutely rallied around him and us and love him. And many of them have had children who have struggled in similar ways. And they are not afraid to be like, I've been there. I know what it's like to not know where your kid is. I know what it's like to have to be on the other side of that phone call. And that openness and that vulnerability is just the greatest gift to me. Like, and I feel like for Camden, though, because of this openness, he's also benefiting from that love and support, because he doesn't have to be afraid of who knows where I've been, who knows what I've done.
Because for a long time, he was very much like, oh my gosh, don't tell anybody, no one can know about this. And now it's like, he recognizes that people do know and that we're not going to keep it a secret. And I think part of that is healing for him as well, because then he's recognizing that people are accepting him despite all these flaws or these things that he doesn't was ashamed about. Yes. Whereas for a long time, I think when people didn't know, then it was kind of like, okay, well, it's reinforced the fact that like, once they really find out who I am, they're not going to love me. They're going to leave me. And I think by being open about it and having those conversations, as difficult and maybe as uncomfortable as Jessica said they can be, that has actually helped him more, because he knows, okay, well, they know and they still love me. They know that I'm not perfect and they still want me to be in their lives.
And I can be, I can be Cam.
Yep.
And I can be grieving. Like this Cam can be here and still be loved and still be accepted. And if my grief looks like this and it's really ugly and antisocial and, they still love me. Yeah. And
because I promise Camden's not the only one out there who feels that way, and that's the thing that we have to remember, that, maybe our conversation today will help that one parent out there who's like, oh my gosh, no one gets it. No one understands what this is, because they're in a similar situation. And it's like, no, there's a lot of Camdens out there. There's a lot of complicated kids
and there should be no shame attached to it. Like Aric and I, we are not perfect parents by any means. And one of the biggest things, I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday about this, is like, I feel like one of the best things I could have done as a parent was be so apologetic. I was constantly, guys, I screwed up again. I yelled again. I'm sorry. I lost it, so that they can see the humanness in me. Not that it excuses it in any way, shape, or form, but just being that, like, look, I don't expect perfection from you because look at me. Like,
right.
And so when you talk about, at the beginning, like you were talking about how Aric and I we come from people born of grief. I was born in grief. We didn't realize what was going to unfold with Cam. But I feel like the reason why we are so, I guess, I don't know what the word is, just hopeful or just willing to fight and have it in us to fight, is because of who we came from and what we came from. And I think of my grandpa and his mom who didn't have people fighting as hard for them. They had to claw out of it on their own. And Cam, how can we let him claw out on his own? Like, we can't leave. We can't. And I won't. But it's like, but by choosing that, you're choosing to walk a hard, like when I see these kids who have no one, it's because it's easier to just let them be locked up and let somebody else deal with them.
Right?
Let somebody else deal with it, because I can't.
Yep. And believe me,
not that we haven't thought that.
No, there's been along the way, be like, you know what? Fine. Let's just let that go.
That's what you want to do.
And then you kind of let it settle in your mind. And then you say, you know what? No, that's not what we're about in our family. That's not what Jesus would do. And then you just kind of regroup, and then you say, okay, we're going to continue to fight.
But I will say the one thing 100% that I've learned from this in helping Cam am all about therapy, and anyone who would ever want to contact me, DM me or anything about all the things we've done. Like I said, I believe in all of it. And I believe that every single thing we did was helpful. Didn't make it all go away.
There was not one fix though.
That's no, but we have amazing tools at our disposal.
That was the magic bullet that did it, right? No. It was all these things where we thought along the process of it was like, well, that didn't work. Well, that didn't work. I mean, you just get so down when it's like, okay, well, we put all that effort into that one and that didn't fix him. I mean, there was a process and he's still in the process of being quote unquote fixed. There's no magic thing, but you just got to keep fighting. It's like,
but I will say the one thing though that has been constant is our relationship with our Savior.
Yeah.
Is that he's the one that has directed us to these different therapies. He's the one that opened the doors for these different things for Cam. And he's the one that's helped us be able to handle what it all encompasses on this end of it. Because it does, yes, it's affected our marriage. It's affected our girls. It's, it is, and it affects your relationship with other people, because there is a point of like, who do I let in? And
sometimes it's easier to be very reclusive and not go into the world because you don't want to have to bring this with you. And I think a lot of times, because like I said, whatever that stigma is, or for us, like I get so tired of having to share the same story with everybody we meet, and they're just, because then like they get a tidbit of it and they don't understand it. And like you said,
because you're like, where do you start the story?
It's just easier just to be like, you know what? Yeah, we're great. Everything's great. Have a great day.
All is well.
So, yep, all is well. It's good.
And all of this sounds very much like grief and the conversations that surround grief. And this is grief from a different perspective, a grief from not an event like a death that is very easily recognizable, but it's still very consistent with what people go through with grief. And I think it's been an amazing conversation, and I'm so grateful for what you have shared. Thank you for being so open, and thank you for just being such a good example of those who are continuing with compassion and being honest and open. It makes a huge difference. So thank you again. And
absolutely. I feel like I love that you knew our Cam before he was our Cam, and you knew all, I mean, with the exception of my grandfather, but these people who are so dear to us that are such a huge part of our story. But I appreciate you letting us share, because I feel like as hard as it is to talk about, especially your child, I think that the way that we comfort and help each other is by sharing what we're going, our shared experiences, and like Aric said, there's not a fix, but there's no magic, but there's Jesus. And I feel like the thing when you ask if Cam's, hope, because of Jesus, and our job is to keep pointing him to Jesus, and that will help him in his grief, and that's the only thing that's gotten us through our grief.
Absolutely.
Well, I feel like you've already answered this question over and over again without being prompted, but I always end with asking, what do you think it means to grieve well? So I wondered if you would both just take a minute to encapsulate what you think the answer to that is.
I feel like, well, it's acknowledging that you're grieving, for one. I feel like sometimes when I'm feeling what I'm feeling, I can start just feeling like I'm such a loser. I'm not being productive today. I'm not doing, I had a blessing once that has stuck with me, where the Lord told me my desire outweighs my responsibility, because my desire is always to be being better and doing and be helping people and doing these things. But when I'm grieving, when I'm in a bad place and I can't do that, then all of a sudden I start internalizing these negative thoughts and these negative feelings. So I feel like grieving well is recognizing that it's okay to be in this space, and to find and allow maybe people, because there are people who reach out and allow, people in. Be thoughtful, be spirit prayerful about that. But if you're married or you have, let your spouse in. I think that for me to grieve well, I need to have Aric know what my grief is looking like right now, and to know that he's not being neglected or I'm, pushing him away. Being able to communicate is really important for grieving well. And I feel like grieving well also is recognizing other people are grieving. And I feel like that's what helps me get through it, is recognizing people standing next to me have no idea what just happened last night or what I'm going through. That means I don't know that the person next to me has. And so it's just, I feel like grieving well is recognizing and having compassion for the people around me who are grieving just as much, but we don't know that they are. And so it's just being kind, being aware, and just, I guess, just letting the Lord like carry the wave, carry you in that, and that it's okay to have joy in your grief. We have,
I think I'll jump in. That's the one thing that I've really taken away from grieving, the idea of, the relationship I was going to have with my son was going to be different than what it is. And, and we talked a little bit about my mom when my mom passed. Like, I think at that point in my life, I was tough, I was in my early 30s, and you kind of have this persona of what it means to be a man. And you're like, I'm good. I can get through this. And like, I don't think I properly grieved. I don't think I knew what it meant. I mean, I had grandparents I was close to that my dad's side that died, and I grieved them in that way. But when someone as close to you as your mother passes away, I didn't know how to do that. And so I think I pushed those things down for a very, very long time. And I think it was probably 10 years after my mom died where I was sitting there. I had this moment where I finally allowed myself to feel it. I finally allowed myself to be like, my mom has missed so much of the last 10 years. And in my mind, I mean, Julie was just as if she was sitting next to me and put her arm around me and was like, no, I've been here. Like, I've seen this. I've seen who you are. I've seen, we were in the middle of this stuff with Cam, and it was like, I see what you're trying to do. And I'm proud of you. Like, I'm proud of who you are. And I felt that love from my mom like 10 years after she died. And I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And like, I couldn't stop it. It just kept, it felt like forever. And finally I went upstairs. It was Sunday afternoon. I remember it distinctly, and everyone was taking naps. And I walked into our bedroom, and Jessica kind of looked at me, and she's like, oh my gosh, like what? Like, I don't think she'd ever seen me like with that expression on my face. And like, I had just been in, I just laid down, and she was just like, oh my gosh, like, what is this? And so I think allowing yourself to feel that, whether it's manly or not in the world we live in, you've got to allow yourself to feel it and then be okay with it. Right. You have to be okay with it. And like Jessica said, it's going to look different for everybody. Right. Because your wife is struggling. Like, then it's like, man, maybe I'm not grieving enough. Right. Maybe I'm not feeling it the same way she is. So there's something wrong with me. Like, no, we're going to feel this how we're going to feel it in our own ways. And that comes from how we've been raised. It comes from what we have experienced in that, or, letting ourselves kind of feel that is so uncomfortable sometimes for us. And so I think just understanding that everyone is going to do this differently, allowing yourself to do it differently, and allowing yourself to feel it and being okay with it is such a huge thing. And then echoing what she said at the end about having joy in that. Like, I felt guilty, like feeling good about the accomplishments I've got going on in my life when I've got this other ongoing grief that I'm feeling with my son, and having to be okay with that. And that's something that I have really tried to find joy in, things other than what's happening with him. As we mentioned, I'm in a bishopric now. And so, pouring myself into serving others has been such a huge thing for me. It's been such an amazing experience to get to know the members in our ward here in our ward family, because we are fairly new to the area, but it's like we've been here forever. And it's like they have gotten it, we've let them in. And that's the thing that's so hard is they see the warts, right? The good and the bad, like they see us for who we are. But that's, I think, accelerated that, them loving us and accepting us, because they're like, hey, these are people too. And yeah, he's in the bishopric. I think a lot of times we look at people in the bishopric, now that I'm in the bishopric, they do not have their lives together. Just maybe have to put on a better face because we're sitting up front and everybody's looking at us. But like I think they appreciate that about me, that I'm like very honest with them. And as I, I'm not the bishop, and so I don't know, all these things that are going on in people's lives, but I have a very good understanding, and I will help counsel with these people. The bishop asked me to do that in specific families that I minister to, and so I understand what's going on. But man, I have so much more compassion for them because of understanding the grief that I felt in my life, and I feel that with them, and I explain to them it's okay to feel that, and man, it's just been such a growth opportunity for me to be in that position, where I can kind of help others with that.
Well, it allows you to be vulnerable,
right?
In a way, in life and in society and other places, you're not able to do that. But when you open yourself to be vulnerable, then it allows you to grieve, and allows someone else in that space to do it with you.
Makes them feel like, okay, I can, it is okay for me to feel that. It is okay for me to recognize that, this guy who I thought his life was together, it's not. And he's got things he's going through. And I love what Jessica said too about everybody around us is, if they're not grieving at that moment, they probably were pretty recently, or they're going to be pretty soon in the future. And it doesn't always have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be somebody dying. That's the obvious ones. We're like, yes, let's grieve together because we know you lost somebody, or we know you lost your job, or we know that you're struggling with this. We'll grieve with you through this process. Man, there's people who grieve their entire lives. Her grandpa, I think, was one of them. And it's one of those things where there's just that constant thing. And they have moments where, like, because he was able to share his life with me and these experiences, and I appreciated those things, he felt a little less grief. And so I feel like we can be those people around us where let's be prayerful every day about who we can orbit, our orbits can cross with.
When you realize in the world that we live in, the society we live in, we know these are the last days. So many people are born in grief.
Yeah.
That we are existing with, like, more than not. And it's just, if sharing our grief and being vulnerable about it, just gives some relief or comfort. I mean, then it helps this just feel like it's not for nothing either, like.
I totally agree. I totally agree with what you're saying. I think as we learn how to grieve well, we really are able to help others around us and lessen that grief and come together. Thank you again so much for everything you shared. It's been a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having us, Julie. We love you.
Love you too.